In today's lesson, I'll show you how to make a fire without matches. Specifically, I'm going to show you how to use something called a ferro rod. Now, a ferro rod is a great tool to have whenever you're going in the outdoors. Sometimes you might not have access to matches or a lighter. And even if you do have matches when it's wet, a lot of times those matches won't ignite. So a ferro rod is a great tool to have. As you can see, mine's been used quite a bit. It's starting to wear there, but a ferro rod is essentially a stick with a striker, and when you strike the ferro rod, you get sparks, and those sparks are used to ignite a fuel source. Today, I'll show you how to start a fire with ferro rods using two methods. The first will be sort of all natural. We'll use birch bark. So if you're in the northern US or in southern Canada, you'll have access to birch most likely. That said, not everyone has access to birch or is comfortable doing that, so I will show you a second method that uses dryer lint, and hopefully everybody has access to dryer lint. If not, there are other things that you could use, cotton balls, things like that. So yeah, with that, let's get started. So what is a ferro rod? A ferro rod stands for ferrocerium, and ferrocerium is a compound that when struck by a harder metal will ignite. As I showed you before, you strike it and there are sparks. So any ferrocerium rod you get, or ferro rod, should have a ferrocerium stick and a striker. And if for some reason you don't have a striker, all you need is a piece of hard metal with a really defined edge. It's that defined corner that creates the sparks. So my ferro rod is it's a Gerber. It's an older one. It's the Bear Grylls Survival ferro rod. It's lasted me at this point almost 10 years. So it's a good brand. I'll add some links in the description here for some ferro rods that you might buy. But yeah, that's it. You can get them on Amazon. Most backpacking or outdoor stores will carry a ferro rod. So this is what you need: ferro rod and a striker. The next thing you'll need is some sort of fuel to ignite. Now, for a ferro rod to ignite fuel, it has to be very, very fine material. Birch bark is my favorite material to use that's sort of out in the woods whenever you're out camping. For those who may not be familiar, birch trees are trees with white bark that comes off in almost paper-like strips. They're typically located in low-lying wet areas, so that'll help you identify it. There is a similar tree called a quaking aspen. Now, the aspen does not have this kind of bark, and you can't do this with it, but it does have white bark. And so a few things that will distinguish them is a quaking aspen will typically develop black bark on the bottom as they get older, so it'll look more like a traditional tree bark. The other thing is that the leaves are different. So the leaves on a birch tree are more, they're thinner. They're a lot thinner. They look like spearheads. The leaves on an aspen are broader or wider. They look more like hearts. Regardless, if you go to peel some of the bark off, you will learn quickly whether or not you have an aspen or a birch. This is taken from a dead tree. You can pull the bark off of live trees if you're in a survival situation. Obviously, that's something you'd want to do. But in a regular situation, dead birch or fallen birch will work just as well as live birch. And the reason being is that this birch bark contains a lot of oil, and that oil ignites and keeps it burning for a long time. So again, try not to pull bark off of live trees, as it may hurt or actually kill the tree. So once we have a sort of a log of birch, we need to take the bark off. And I like to do that with a very structured method, I'll say, because if you don't do it the right way, it can be really hard to get this off. So what I have, and if you're ever out camping, you should always have a sharp knife. Mine is very big. Yours doesn't need to be this big. But what I'm going to do is, cutting away from myself, I'm going to take this bark and I'm going to score it, which means I'm going to cut a line straight down to the part where I want the bark to start peeling off. Now, I've already taken a bunch of bark off up here on this front part, so I'm going to start a little further down and peel a piece off from about here to here. What you'll see is I will score this right here, and it'll take a few times to get all the way through. But I'm going to cut a line to the point where I want it to go. Now, you'll also notice I'm using safety gloves because the way I hold my knife for cutting this could always potentially cut me. So I like to wear gloves whenever possible. If not, obviously be very careful. Sharp knives are better. Even though they'll cut you faster, they actually avoid slippage or things where you might accidentally push real hard, or where you feel like you have to push hard because your knife's not sharp and then slip and cut yourself. You notice the other thing I'm doing, I believe I mentioned this, but is I'm cutting away from myself and I'm not cutting towards my legs. So what I don't want to do is slip and cut my legs or accidentally slip and pull the knife towards me. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to score a line all the way around the bottom of this log, or the spot where I want the bark to peel off. I'm going to score a line all the way across. I'll save you from that. It doesn't make for great video, but that's the next step. Okay, so I've got my birch bark, I've got my knife. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, with the grain of the birch bark, gently start scraping up little pieces of birch. They'll come off just like paper, tiny, tiny little pieces of paper. I'll take that blade and just using the blade, push down and start pulling up layer by layer. I'll do it on both sides just to get as much as I can, both directions. The other thing you'll want to notice is that I'm using the underside of the bark. This is what's called the underbark. The outside of the bark will work as well, but there's a good chance that the outside of the bark is also wet, which will just make it harder to ignite. So that's about it. That's about what I need. I'll show you a close-up here. You can see really fine, almost paper-like strips. Now, once I have my fuel set up, my birch bark paper-like strips, I'm going to try to flatten out this piece of bark. This is going to be the platform that I use to start the fire. I'm going to have extra pieces ready to go and burn once the fire starts, as you can see here. And I'm going to get my ferro rod ready. Now, there is technique to the ferro rod, and this is what will either make or break your fire. So what we want to do is a few things. The first thing we're going to want to do is hold the striker in one hand, and we want to anchor it. I like to anchor it knuckles down with the flat side facing whatever I want to ignite. So knuckles down, flat side facing whatever I want to ignite. The next thing I'm going to make sure I do is I'm going to, once I anchor that, I'm going to pull my ferro rod backwards. I'm not going to push my striker forward. So if I do that and I miss, or I do it too strong, I'm going to hit my fuel and it's going to go flying everywhere. So anchoring the hand, pulling the ferro rod back. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get this ferro rod, or I should say the striker, as close to the fuel that I want to ignite as possible. And I'm going to face the flat side towards whatever I want to ignite, because that's going to push the sparks in the direction I want. Okay? And I'm going to try to anchor on this birch bark. Let's see if it folds or not. But you'll see I've put my knuckles down on the birch bark. I'm facing the paper with the flat side of the striker. I set my ferro rod here. I'll do this a few times. We'll see how it goes. Don't be discouraged if it takes you a lot of times. This is a lot of work when you're first learning, but once you get the hang of it, it goes pretty fast. So I'm going to anchor my arm. I'm actually going to stand up to get more stability. And yeah, here we go. almost. We had one light. Let's see if we can get the main part to light here. Oh, and there it goes. Now you see it's starting to burn. What I'm going to do is add some more bark to the mix so that fire builds. And then if I'm building a full-on fire, what I want to be sure I do is have all of my materials ready to build the fire on top of this. Okay, so you always want to have your wood and whatnot ready to go, your tinder, kindling, and fuel ready to go before you start a fire. But you'll see how long this birch bark burns, so you have a really good chance of starting your fire using this as your ignition source. The other thing you'll notice is all the black smoke. That black smoke is the oil that is now burning out of that birch bark. So, that's a lot of smoke, huh? Well, next we'll move on to starting a fire using our ferro rod, but with dryer lint. So as I mentioned before, not everyone may have access to birch. Not everyone may be comfortable identifying it. A good alternative, and something you can always carry with you with your ferro rod kit, is some dryer lint. This is literally dryer lint that just came out of my dryer like a few minutes ago, maybe like 30 minutes ago. But this is hopefully everyone should have access to this if you have a dryer, if you use a dryer. Now the only thing I'm going to do to prep this is I'm going to break it apart a little bit so that really fine fibers are exposed. That's it. Just going to break it apart a little bit. Once I do that, all the steps are the same. I take my striker, I anchor my hand knuckles down as close to the lint as I can get. I'm actually going to stand up again to anchor my arm even more securely, and I'm going to pull that ferro rod backwards. We'll see how it goes. And there we go. It's burning. So get out there, get your ferro rod, and get making some fires.